Hey, we have all been told that if you crash a helmet, then be sure to replace it. Even if there's very little visibly wrong with that helmet, better to replace it than not. But there's another reason to replace your helmet, and that is age. Helmets actually have a shelf life, or a head life, as it were.
I like that, head life. Laser helmets suggest you swap out your used helmets every couple of years. A combination of sweat and UV rays take their toll on that head protection, and just like some crashes, the helmet may still look good after a couple of years, but it's still time for a replacement.
Oh yeah, I've actually seen this happen where the foam in one of my helmets started cracking. No good. Don't wait for that to happen. If you can't remember when you bought your helmet, then please go to Laser's website and start looking at a new one. We'd suggest for Leadville something from the Road lineup.
Yeah, the Vento is for the racer who is aero-conscious. Probably my number one pick for race day. Totally good at Leadville if you are looking for marginal gains. The Z1 and the G1 are great premium lids with a little bit more in the way of vents. But even the Strata or the Sphere are going to be great, especially if you mostly wear mountain bike helmets and don't want to shell out all that extra cash for a high-end road helmet.
Right. Check out the entire Laser helmet lineup at lasersport.us. Laser is part of the Shimano family, and thanks Shimano for being the title sponsor of this show.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race presented by Shimano. It is season 7, episode 23 of the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I'm Michael Houghton, high to the most.
I'm Eldon Nelson, fatty on this show and in most mountain bike contexts, just not as I cross the finish line, where the announcer still does, in fact, call me Eldon. One of these days, I had to get that fixed.
Sure.
This show, we are going to have 2 great interviews, one about nutrition and one that offers some inspiration.
Our inspiration will come from a racer who got to Leadville against all odds. He is challenged athlete Jeff Waldmuller. But we start with nutrition and CEO Andy Blow of Precision Fuel and Hydration. Performance will be in the neutral aid along with scratch this year. Now, we heard from Dr. Alan Lim earlier this season, so we wanted to check in with Andy Blow on ways we can keep our race day nutrition strategies going and how to respond to those on-course issues.
Andy, welcome to the show. We are super excited to have both Precision Fuel and Hydration and you at this year's Leadville 100.
Yeah, we're incredibly excited. It's an iconic event. It's been on my radar for years, and to be there as a brand, and also I'm going to be there as an individual this year, and I couldn't be more excited.
Are you racing or crewing?
I'm crewing. Definitely not racing.
All right.
It's on the list. It's on the bucket. It is on the bucket list ever since. So a friend of mine, Mark Webber, who was a racing driver that I used to work with, he did it a few times and told me all the stories, and that's what got me really, really interested in it. But I'm in no shape to be riding 100 miles at the moment.
Well, welcome to the crewing club. I'm a crew person too at this stage in my racing career. Some may say you're doing it the correct way too. Crew first and then race. You'll get a great feel for, what's at stake here. Which primarily, Andy, Leadville, as we've discussed on this show many a times, if Leadville were at sea level, it'd just be any old regular 100 miler. Elevation, 10,000 feet. I can't convert that to meters for you, but it's very high, is the X factor at Leadville. So what should the athlete keep in mind when it comes to fueling and hydration and high altitude?
Yeah, so altitude puts more pressure and stress on the body. You burn more calories, you burn more carbohydrates when you're working at altitude, and you have the potential as well, depending on a little bit on the temperature, but you have the potential to lose a lot more fluid as well because your respiratory rate goes up, you breathe harder, you lose more respiratory moisture. The air can be drier up at altitude. So usually what we find is that carbohydrate, fluid and electrolyte requirements are increased for athletes at altitude compared with like-for-like durations, intensities, temperatures and things at sea level.
And so in addition to that, is just the difficulty of getting food down at 10,000 to 12,000 feet. I can't chew when I am at 11,500 feet because my mouth is wide open, just doing what I can to get the air I need. So factor that in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't, as you said, you can't chew because you're breathing so hard. Everything becomes more of an effort in terms of what your mouth and respiratory system are doing. So trying to shovel down solid foods, you're going to be far more interested in taking on liquid calories as well as fluids and electrolytes for hydration, and semi-liquid calories like the kind of gels and those sorts of things. You're going to need to take on stuff that can just slip down really easily rather than stuff that's going to slow you down or have to chew. Also, I think anything that's a bit dry or could dry your mouth out, your mouth is going to be dry anyway. And so having like energy bars that aren't very moist, those kind of things, they're not going to be a favoured choice. And you're not going to get away with using those as you might do at lower altitudes.
All right, so during an event, what are some of the early warning signs? I mean, we all know when we've bonked, right? We just come to the side of the trail, we're stopped, the lights feel like they're going to go out on us. But can we see or recognize any warning signs before the big bonk happens or before we become really behind on our hydration? And can we respond to those early warning signs?
Yeah, I think with hydration specifically, one to look at, a lot of people these days monitor power output and they monitor heart rate, and they have a decent idea of the relationship between those two things. If you start to see your heart rate decoupling from your power output, so if you're seeing a lot of cardiovascular drift, which is your heart rate drifting up for a given power, let's say you've been averaging 200 watts and you're at 150 beats a minute, and then suddenly that's becoming 155, 160 beats a minute, it means your heart's having to work harder to keep the amount of blood flow going around to deliver that kind of power, and that can be a pretty strong sign that maybe your blood volume is starting to drop and you're becoming dehydrated, especially if that's linked in with things like you haven't peed for a very, very long time, you've got a dry mouth, you're feeling all the classic signs of dehydration. Then if that all adds up together, then the chances are you're starting to get behind on your fluids. The other thing as well I always like athletes to fall back on is if you go into a long distance endurance race, I really firmly believe you should have some kind of idea of the parameters of your hydration and fueling, like roughly how many bottles, how many fluid ounces, how many milliliters do I expect to be taken in per hour. And I think it's incredibly important to be keeping a mental inventory of how close you are to those expected numbers, because it can be really confusing 5-6 hours in. If you've not really been thinking about it, you're not sure, I was thinking I should need 2 bottles an hour, but have I really been having 2 bottles an hour? You need to be quite disciplined on making sure that you've modelled this beforehand with some hard training sessions, some B races, you've got an idea of what works for you, and then you need to stay attentive to that, and you need to keep a mental inventory throughout the race.
So what do you do if you get behind? That is something that happens, I think, to a lot of us. There will be some segment where you just say to yourself, look, I'll eat when I get over this rise, or I will eat when I finish this descent, right? There are environmental factors that keep you from staying on your fueling target. Do you catch up, or do you just pick up from where you left off?
I think you have to try to make an effort to sort of catch up and not accumulate bigger losses. But what you can't often do is catch up very, very quickly and overwhelm your stomach. You can't just hope to think, right, well, I was aiming for 2 bidons or 2 bottles per hour, and for the last 3 hours I've only had 1, so I've got to drink 3 more. And then you just hose 3 more down. You're obviously going to get very bloated, feel very sicky, and you've got to discipline yourself to try to come back. I would say it's like if you're watching the Tour de France at the moment, then you see how Jonas Vingegaard tries to come back to Pogacar. He doesn't just like do it all in the first 30 seconds. He takes 5Ks to slowly wind the guy back up. Well, you've got to slowly wind your fueling and hydration back up, and probably in concert with that, you've got to be real, and you may need to make some compromises around your pace and effort. You may need to slow it down a little bit to give yourself some time to digest, consume and digest, because ultimately if you're not very, very deep into the race, you are setting yourself up for failure if you get too far behind on either carbs or fluids and electrolytes. So recognizing that a few seconds lost to slowing down and managing your pace to maximize eating and drinking, maybe minutes or even hours for some people gained in the latter stages of the event because you were keeping on top of your fluid and hydration, your fluid hydration and calorific losses.
So let's talk about being ready for the differences in weather that can be found at altitude and especially Leadville. For instance, Andy, last year at Leadville, almost without warning, the day was unseasonably cool. Like we got a great racing day because temperatures really the sun never really came out fully and got people in a full sweat. So what we saw subsequently were bottles remaining full. Now, for the racer who's depending on fuel from that bottle, that can be a problem. The hydration is not the problem. They're plenty hydrated. Now they're not getting the fuel. On the other side of the coin, we get hot days sometimes too, and you're drinking all you can and maybe overfueling. So can you give us some tips on striking a balance and being ready kind of for anything? Because the weather can be, unlike the altitude, the weather is unpredictable there.
What you've articulated there, Hottie, is the crux of the problem here, is that if you're aiming to get all of your calories and all of your liquids and your electrolytes from one bottle, from one fuel source, then unless you hit the exact numbers that you intended to hit before the race based on a prediction, then you're going to be making a compromise if you either drink more or drink less. And I think that a few years ago, my approach and my recommendation to athletes in endurance events was very clearly aimed at get your electrolytes and fluids from your bottles and get the majority, if not all, of your carbohydrate calories from things that are in your pockets, like your gels, your chews, your bars, your foods, and whatever else. Because by decoupling your hydration from your food, your calorific demands, your carbohydrate consumption per hour, is going to be relatively consistent throughout the day, no matter what the temperature. For a lot of the top racers, I'd imagine that's going to be in excess of 100 grams an hour these days at something like Leadville. For the more, middle of the pack to lower end of the pack, you might be more down at 60, 70, 80 grams of carbohydrate per hour, depending on what your stomach can handle and how you've trained on it. But that's not going to alter. So you need to be getting, a minimum amount of that from the foods or gels that you're eating, because if you go, the difference in how much you might drink is dramatic. You might drink half a bottle an hour in really, really cold, wet conditions, and you might drink 3 bottles an hour in really, really hot conditions. And if you are getting the lion's share of your calories from those bottles, you're either significantly underdoing the calories, or you could be massively overdoing the calories and overwhelming the gut. So I think all-in-one sports drinks, like isotonic sports drinks that have carbs and electrolytes, can play a role. They can play a component in your fueling strategy. But you've got to be mindful of the fact that if you start drinking 3 bottles an hour with a lot of carbs, the Lotto team that we work with in Tour de France, they have 40 grams of carbs in all of their carb bottles. So if they move up in the hot weather to drinking 3 bottles an hour, which is 120 grams of carbohydrate, they'll pretty much stop eating gels alongside that. But when they're only drinking 1 bottle an hour in the start of the stage, they're eating 2 or 3 or 4 gels with that, and they have the intelligence to, on the fly, manipulate those numbers. And I think that's a critical skill that you've got to take to an event like Leadville, where the conditions are unpredictable.
Yeah, it's a skill definitely worth developing. It's also a really hard one to have for the amateur racer who is at altitude, to use the phrase we use all the time here, racing stupid. We are a little punchy when we are 70 miles into a race and we are at 11,000 feet. Our brains just aren't working right. I think it's just worth having something that is simple and structured and is going to be resilient to the weather, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if I can jump in, Eldon, just on that, I think the key message for any athlete doing an event like this is there's 3 things that you need to know from a nutritional standpoint when you go into the race. You need to know how much volume of fluid you intend to take per hour based on different variations of weather conditions. You need to know how much sodium you need to accompany that fluid with, and that's based on your physiology, how much you sweat, how much sodium you lose, but you have to have an idea of whether you need a lot of salt or a little bit of salt with that. And then thirdly, you need to have a handle on the amount of grams of carbohydrate you need per hour. And then if you honestly, if you get those three things just about right, if you get in the right ballpark for how much fluid, how much sodium, how much carbohydrate you have per hour, most of the other stuff, as long as you pace it right, most of the other stuff falls into place. And you need then a nutritional system that allows you to manipulate those numbers and calculate those numbers on the fly, so that each hour, very roughly, you are getting close to those numbers. And if you really boil down the simplicity of it, that's what it is. That's what you need to try and achieve.
So we have a lot of racers, Andy, this year relying on neutral feed. Precision Fuel and Hydration will be in neutral feed this year. So for the racer coming into a neutral aid station, what do they need to know about your products for race day, and what should they kind of reach for as they get there?
So the product that we're providing for Leadville is a PF30 energy gel. So that's a single serve energy gel with 30 grams of 2-to-1 glucose fructose carbohydrate in it. It's got no flavor, very neutral. And the reason it's 30 grams of carbohydrate per serving is because the recommendations for carbohydrate consumption tend to coalesce around like 30, 60, 90, 120 grams an hour. So we want to keep it real simple with, like, you want 60 grams, that's 2 gels an hour. You want 90 grams, that's 3 gels an hour. You pick those up. They have no electrolytes in them because we want you to be able to pull that lever separately. I'm a very, very salty sweater. I need tons of electrolytes, but some people only need a small amount. And you need to be getting your fluids and electrolytes from a different place, but from our product you'll get the energy that you need if you choose to go that route. And the fact that it's a neutral taste, it has zero, we don't add any flavour. It tastes a bit sweet because it's a carbohydrate-based product. The reason for that is that we want to help people avoid taste fatigue. And there's lots of gels on the market that have there are some really good tasting gels on the market, but they're not to everyone's taste. Some people love ones with wacky flavours. Some people love cola flavour ones, or birthday cake flavour ones, or orange flavour ones, but some people hate them. We decided to do something which is just like, I don't like using the word bland, has bad connotations, but our gel, you just have it all day long. Like I've used it for 10 hours straight with pretty much nothing else. And you don't love it by the end, but it's still sitting well in your stomach and you're tolerating it. And I think that's the key. Your nutrition plan just needs to take into account taste fatigue and how you're going to feel when you're a bit hot, dehydrated, tired out, at altitude. That's the bottom line.
So would you recommend for racers who are just either have not tried your product before or are only newly introduced to it, to use it on race day? Or are you more wary of experimenting or trying something new on a race?
I'm absolutely in favour of people doing what's tried and tested on race day. You don't want to introduce new things. I think that we've known for a while that the gels are on course, and if they're going to be a major component of someone's nutrition strategy, I would hope that they've picked some up in the build-up and use them in training. What I would say, obviously, is that by understanding exactly what they are, if you get into a bit of a hole, or if you are pretty confident that you've got an iron gut and you were just planning on picking up whatever gels they're slinging out anyway, then definitely incorporate them, definitely use them. If you feel like your blood sugar's getting low, if you feel like you need more energy, or you're behind on your numbers, you use those gels. That is exactly what they're there for. But ultimately, for most people, Leadville is a marquee event in the year. They'll have hopefully prepped in the same way that you just wouldn't whip on a new pair of tyres with a different tread that you found at the expo. But you're smiling, Eldon, because probably people do. I'm sure they buy a new pair of shoes or whatever. Nothing new on race day is a mantra that we would ascribe to. Always.
Andy, it has been a pleasure having you on. Some amazing, useful information for this. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be invited, and can't wait to meet you guys in the flesh in a few weeks' time.
All right, thanks again to Andy Below at Precision Fuel and Hydration. If you are all set on your nutrition and hydration products, we'd still encourage you to go to Precision's website. Andy has a degree in sports and exercise science, and his company's knowledge base is full of great info on this very complex topic.
Yeah, and as you might guess, Precision Fuel and Hydration is available at the feed. Hadi and I have both been experimenting with some of their products. The gels have a very basic, simple taste. I like them. Same with the chews. Both seem like they might be really good at staving off that flavor fatigue you get after 10 hours on the bike.
Yeah, right. In addition to its 30-gram gels, Precision also has a 90-gram pouch with a screw on top or a 300-grammer, great for filling flasks. They also have sodium supplements for customizing your hydration and electrolyte needs. So a real versatile suite of products from a company that has put a lot of thought into what keeps athletes going.
And again, all of that is available at The Feed. So go to thefeed.com/Leadville, claim your $80 annual credit, register your email, verify your phone number, and then you get to spend your first Feed credit, $20, right away. Another thing you are likely all set on is what you will be wearing on race day. Hopefully, it is a custom kit from DNA Cycling. And if not, maybe you've got something off the rack from the DNA store. You've heard us all season waxing poetic about DNA clothing and custom work, but there's only so much that words can do. Sometimes you just got to see it.
Oh, so true. I'm that way especially. I like a visual first, right? Let us suggest a great way to get eyes on DNA's custom work. Check out some of their sponsored athletes. A guest of this show a few seasons back, Brian McCullough. He wears a custom DNA kit. His is on the subtle side, but still classy. The primary sponsor is Felt Bikes. The colors are mostly blues and the pattern's bold. But again, words can only do so much. So go check out Brian on his socials.
Another is Alex Wild. Like his last name, Alex's kit is a little more wild. Alex is a lifetime Grand Prix athlete, so in addition to his socials, you could get a look at his design in person in Leadville. Take note of how Alex has his name on the back of his jersey right beneath the collar.
Yeah, whether you like a clean look or something crazy, DNA has a lot of different ways of meeting your custom needs. When you're ready to go custom, go to DNAcycling.com.
Overcoming obstacles is part of most Leadville stories. Just about every rider's journey to Leadville contains some level of perseverance. All of those stories have value, but some stick out more than others.
When we saw Jeff Waldmuller's post on the Facebook participants page on how he had crashed early on in last year's race and rode most of the rest of the race with a broken collarbone, we just had to have him on. Little did we know that Jeff's crash and finish were just a small portion of what he overcame to get into and race in the Leadville 100.
Jeff Waldmuller, it is great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining the Leadville podcast.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So I think really for you, at least, starting with your origin story is critical. So tell us a little bit about why we have you on the show.
Wow. I grew up a country boy in North Texas. Went to a small high school. I think my graduating class was around, 68 people or so. And I was a band kid, and I had the opportunity back in year 2000. So I was about 16 years old. I was invited to go and audition for a drum and bugle corps. It's a professional marching band. These guys are just extreme. I never in my wildest dreams imagined that I would be able to make any drum corps, let alone the reigning world champions Cavaliers. And so I went to an audition camp for the Cavaliers just to kind of check it out and see what it was. As it turned out, I made the corps, and actually they were quite impressed with my background with my high school marching band and all of that. So I toured with them in 2001, and we again won world championships, and that really kicked off a history of just great things. I learned how to be a man in this group. This is one of the only all-male drum and bugle corps around, and I learned a lot. I was 16 years old going on a professional tour. For about 10 years, I toured professionally as a trumpet player mostly, but also played guitar and percussion and several other instruments. I became a stage performer, and I auditioned for a Broadway show. It's called Blast. It's a spectacle, Emmy and Tony Award-winning show. It's kind of like a Blue Man, along the same lines as Blue Man Group, Cirque du Soleil, Stomp. Toured with them, and leading into where I am today, that I was off of tour. And I went home for the holidays. At the time, I was living in Houston, going to school at University of Houston for my music degree. And I was home for the holidays in Wichita Falls. And I went out with some friends to watch a movie, and on the way back to my mom and dad's house, about a mile and a half from their house, a semi truck veered into my lane. I was on my motorcycle, and I ended up underneath this trailer, and the wheels rolled over my body. It was a really incredible experience, and very pivoting in my life, as you'll find out. But that after 20 some odd surgeries and a year of rehab, trying to get back into it, we were able to save my arm and my leg, which were very severely crushed by 80,000-pound truck.
Which arm, which leg?
My right arm and right leg. So very, very important for me to be a stage performer, to be able to play my instruments with my right arm, and also to be able to dance, do the choreography and everything that goes with being on stage. And so we fought and fought and fought and fought. I mean, really at the time, amputation for me and my family, it was not an option, because the only amputees we'd ever met or we'd ever known was Captain Hook and Lieutenant Dan, in the movies, or maybe someone begging on a corner. I mean, that's what we expected for amputees. Just small town. Even with the travels I'd done, I never really knew that amputees could be active. And so that was a terrifying moment, in that, well, if we chop off my leg, then that's it. Forget. I mean, I'm not gonna be able to do anything.
But at some point you actually did. I mean, I'm going to cut to the chase just a little bit, but you made the decision that I guess it was not worth it to continue in the quest to keep this leg. So what happened here?
Yeah, so we were at a pivotal point. This is around September 2009.
Mm-hmm. So a year later or so. Not quite.
Yeah, a year later or so. And I had to make the choice: either keep fighting, keep having more surgeries, more skin grafts, and an ankle fusion, which is not really a great way to go about for a young 24-year-old man, or amputate my leg. And my doctor at that time was one of my best buds, my orthopedic surgeon. He said, listen, go up to Oklahoma City. There's a place up there. I want you to go. They're the best in prosthetics. It's Scott Sablish Prosthetics. And talk to them. So I did. But the thing is, I couldn't tell my mom and dad. Like, I'm 24 years old, and I'm like, oh, don't tell mom and dad. Like, I've become a dependent again. I mean, everything. I couldn't shower or go to the bathroom or anything by myself for a long time. But anyway, I made a trip up to Oklahoma City to see a foot specialist. Well, because it's going to have an ankle fusion. That's what kind of I alluded to them. But actually, this is a prosthetic foot specialist. So I went up there, had an evaluation, and kind of talked to them a little bit about. They showed me some cool, painted up, cool prosthetic stuff, and they introduced me to. I got to see some of their patients, using crutches and things in the hallways. But then it's like, what about somebody who's young? What does that mean? And so they introduced me to this guy, Roderick Green. He's a Paralympian gold medalist. He and his wife both amputees. And they said, well, go up to University of Central Oklahoma. He's playing a basketball game. Go check him out there. Cool. So I roll over there, and I'm expecting, wheelchair basketball, because an amputee surely would be in a wheelchair playing basketball. It was my thought then. And sure enough, I show up. There's no wheelchairs to be seen anywhere. So I sit down. I wait for somebody to roll up to me, and there's this heated game going on. I'm like, my gosh, this is a good game. I'll just sit here and watch. And the game finished, and nobody was around. It's like, I guess he's not here. So I bailed. I was going to drive home. And I hear my name, Jeff. And I turn around. This is tall, muscled up dude. He said, where are you going? I said, well, I'm trying to find Roderick. He goes, I'm Roderick. And he pulls up his pant leg, and he shows me his prosthesis. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. This is the guy sprinting up and down the court, slamming on all these like collegiate athletes. He scored probably 30 points while I was sitting there watching the game. And it was just mind boggling. He said, hey, we're going to go to the track and work out now. I'm like, okay, so this is it. So I called Josh, my orthopedic surgeon, like, Josh, this is it. Let's do this. He goes, all right, we'll see you Wednesday. So we had the amputation. But the hard part was telling mom and dad. So I get home, and Scott Sablish Prosthetics, they're really good about sending you all kinds of information about coping with limb loss and all that stuff. Well, they had sent it home. And so when I showed up at home, Mom and dad are sitting at the dinner table, arms crossed. I'm like, oh, great. What did I do? And I see the packet from Scott Savage Prosthetics from Oklahoma City. I'm like, oh, busted. It's like the time when I got my first tattoo and I left my care sheet in the floor and I got busted. But sure enough, they're like, well, listen, this is your choice, but you can't go back. I'm like, okay. So we had the amputation the week, just a few days later.
So how far up on your leg?
It's about halfway up my shin. So if you measure from the bottom of my patella, your kneecap, it's about maybe 7 inches down.
So you were able to keep your knee.
I was. Yeah, and that's a huge benefit. We were worried about that at first because all of my tissue had been just severed from the bone. It was internal degloving, and I had tons and tons of patches of necrotic skin. And so, just the amputation was hard because there wasn't a lot of viable tissue. So I've got probably from mid thigh to the end of my limb, it's 80%, 80% scar tissue, like bad scar tissue. It's marbled, it's really thin, it's prone to wounds. So we had a lot of hard work ahead of us.
Yeah. They saved your right arm, though, which is great. And what was your athletic life like pre-injury?
Being in the Drum and Bugle Corps, we're sprinting across the field while blasting notes at the top of our lungs. And, I was very athletic in those regards. But growing up in Wichita Falls, the home of the Hotter Than Hell 100 bike race, it's a very famous bike race. They used to pass right in front of my house every year growing up. And it's like, oh, this is so cool. So in 1995, I was 10 years old. My dad and I decided to jump in. So we did like a 25 mile. And that was my first thing. But, I rode my bike all the time. I was always on my bike. But that one time a year, about 2 weeks before the race, I'm like, oh, I'm going to get on a road bike now and pedal some so I'm ready for the race.
So post-surgery, things changed, obviously. It sounds like your career changed and your focus on athletics changed in a big way. So tell us, where you are now.
Yeah. So at that point, I had to see, what can I do? I don't know, what's possible. And I'd say that I still don't know that. I still don't know my limit. But at the time I had to see. And so I got set up with Challenged Athletes Foundation. I applied for a grant, and they graciously accepted because I wanted to ride mountain bikes because I wanted to be cool. I wanted to show what I could do,
Oh, we are such a cool group of people. Absolutely.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. The best. All my running friends are like, no. But I got a mountain bike. I got a little giant hardtail. It was the 29er, back when 29ers were just getting off the ground in 2010. And I went back to Hotter Than Hell and joined their mountain bike race. And then, I did pretty well. And then I started jumping into other things.
How did Leadville get on your radar?
I start riding like, this is the life. This is so freaking cool. Well, I go up to the Idaho Rendezvous, which is a mountain bike festival up at Grand Teton. And I'm riding. We have a huge adaptive field there. And I run into this dude named Willie. You guys know Willie, One Arm Willie. He's very infamous among the Leadville family. And we're just riding and having a great time. And we're just ripping through that resort. So much fun. And we're chatting. He's like, what have you done? Like, what are you up to? I'm like, well, I just finished the Hotter Than Hell Quadzilla thing and all these other things. And he's like, man, that's cool. He said, I'm doing Leadville. I'm like, oh, yeah, a buddy of mine did that. He goes, dude, you should do Leadville. Come do Leadville with me. I'm like, really? He goes, dude, you can do Leadville. Come do Leadville. In fact, you know what? You should do the whole lead challenge with me. Be a lead man with me. I'm like, do you think so? He goes, yeah. Oh, man, I didn't sleep for a week. I was just glued to the computer, researching, doing all this stuff. I'm like, I tell my wife, I think I want to do this. She goes, okay. So I get together with Challenge Athletes Foundation. They offer me a grant to go do the lead challenge. And so I'm signed up for 2020. And that's kind of how my intro to Leadville came about.
Fatty and I have been both watching the Tour de France this summer. We have been cheering on our favorite riders and teams, but we've been doing one other rather odd thing, and that is cheering on our favorite equipment.
Very strange indeed. I mean, who in their right mind cheers for a bicycle or components? We do. That's who. And that is because Envy has been killing it, featured prominently in this year's tour.
Yeah, in addition to its wheels rolling under the yellow jersey, the champion of this year's tour, Tadej Pogacar, and his UAE team, all of them on Envy wheels and Envy bars. Envy bikes were ridden by Team Total Energies. And on stage 9, the Envy Melee got its first Tour de France win. Anthony Turgis won the much talked about gravel stage. And while many French fans were yelling, "Anthony, Anthony," Fatty and I were screaming, "Envy, Envy." And if it's any indication of how light an Envy bike is, after 108 miles, 14 sectors of gravel, and one big sprint to the line, Anthony tossed his Melee in the air and then caught it on the way down.
Did you gasp when he did that?
I did. I was like, no, don't throw it.
It was fine. He caught it, as you mentioned. Now, this celebration was dampened a few days later when some idiot or idiots stole several bikes from Team Total Energies, including Anthony's Stage 9 winning Envy Melee. Couldn't believe it. Made me mad. Luckily, the team, of course, has plenty of spares. But still, do the team and Envy a favor and show your support for them and disgust for those thieves. We hate bike thieves. But back to topic. For the best components and tour stage winning bikes, it is Envy. That is ENVE.com.
Go Envy, Envy. All right, more challenge and inspiration now from our special guest this show, Jeff Waldmuller.
I can't help but nerd out on equipment a little bit, and your equipment is different than any equipment I have experience on. So how do you set up your right leg?
There's no one prosthetic limb that allows you to do all these different sports. Yeah, I can ride a bike. I can probably jog a little bit on my everyday prosthesis, but I have activity-specific prosthetics that allow me to truly meet my potential, and especially high-performing ones. And they're really expensive. I mean, these prosthetic limbs that I'm running on are about $18,000, and my cycling leg is probably, $14,000 or $15,000. My everyday walking leg is $28,000 is what it bills to insurance for. And these things wear out. They're wearable parts. It's like tires on your car, and they have to be replaced about every 3 to 5 years for the average person. Here I am busting out thousands of miles a year on the most rugged terrain. I mean, I live in Utah. You know what it's like riding here. We've got rocky, hard descents and things. So I beat the hell out of these things. And so I have to replace them frequently. And it's really a benefit that I'm a prosthetist, and I have access to build these things myself. And I also have the support of Challenge Athletes Foundation and Team Catapult and some other gracious sponsors to help me get through some of this, but it's still really expensive. But my bike setup is really interesting because it's different than my walking leg, because with walking, you bear a lot different forces than you do cycling. And so my cycling prosthesis is built to where it's very lightweight. It's a bit aerodynamic. I don't have a shoe. I don't have a foot. In fact, I on the bottom of my socket, which is the part my limb goes into, it's made of carbon fiber. There's just an aluminum pipe that comes down. It's called a pylon. And on the end of that is just a small carbon plate with a cleat. And I use egg beaters because they're a little bit easier to get in and out of. I don't have to search for the pedal and things as much with my prosthesis. And so it's just literally a tube with the cleat on the end of it. And so that's what I use. Now for mountain biking, because I know with Leadville, you're going to be hiking a bike. So I built this foot that's a little bit larger of a platform. It's just a carbon fiber plate. And I took Maxxis fat bike mountain bike tread and glued to the bottom of it. So I've got really huge, deep lugs so that when I'm hiking up a hill, I have some traction there.
So for the cycling side of things, where is the movement? Is it only at the knee, or is there some type of ankling style movement too?
No, there have been studies, and I'll be the first one to tell you that you don't want movement at the ankle. because that's loss of energy, because we don't have the ability to actively plantar and dorsiflex. Any movement at the ankle, even if it's like a hydraulic shock, you're going to lose that energy in the pedal stroke. It's great if you're doing downhill. So there are some prosthetic feet out there that are designed for mountain biking, that have like a really cool Fox Racing shock on it, and they're awesome as long as you're going down, pointed downhill. But when it comes to pedal efficiency, it's lost, and it's quite heavy. So you know, if you're doing a 100-mile mountain bike race, you want light, you want efficient. So it's a very rigid connection. So I have no suspension in my limb whatsoever, and the motion comes from my knee and my hip. So I have pretty good strength in my knee. But if you look at my stats, my training stats, my right side is about 30% less efficient than my left side. So it's lopsided. And so when it comes to climbing, this is the hardest part for me, because I'm putting out a ton more energy to get up those hills than the next able-bodied person. So doing the Leadville 100 is more like the Leadville 170 for me, you know?
Yeah. And do you change up chain ring? Like, do you go with an oval ring? I'm just trying to imagine what you might try and do to help smooth things out at all.
Yeah, so I use an oval ring, and it works really well. But you know, you start getting bobbing when you're on like flat, fast sections. What actually would be the most beneficial if I had some sort of aspherical ring that would keep in mind the pedal stroke on my right side versus left side. And I've talked to some manufacturers about it, and they're interested. But since it's like a low production thing, they're like, it's going to cost a lot of money. So I've thought about that. I've also considered doing different crake arm lengths, so shorter on my right side, and that will help me get my knee over the pedal stroke on my right side, because that's one of the hardest things with cycling is getting your knee over the top of the pedal stroke, because you don't have dorsiflexion, so your leg ends up being longer on that side versus the other.
So we know what happened with 2020. We had COVID, canceled, deferral. So how do you pick up the Leadville challenge again? How does it reemerge, and what do you do with it?
I deferred to 2022, and this is where stories start getting really interesting here, because things had started returning back to normal. Was prepping for the Leadville Marathon in June, but I had a work trip to Germany right before, and it worked out that I would, on my return flight home, I would spend 2 weeks in Germany, and the return flight home, I would just land in Denver and drive over to Leadville for the marathon. No problem. I land in Denver, I get in a rental car, I get about an hour on the road, so there's just a little bit of time left between there and Leadville, and I start feeling a little sniffly. I'm like, what's this? I feel a little hot in the head. I'm like, this sucks. Like, am I getting sick? And so I had a take-home COVID test, so I took it. Sure enough, tested positive for COVID. I'm like, shit, man, this is just the worst. And I'm like, well, you know, I need to make sure. So I went to an actual clinic and got a clinical test, and they expedited it for me. And sure enough, it was COVID positive. So I call the race directors and I'm like, look, I literally, is this day of packet pickup? So I'm supposed to run the marathon the next day. And so I call the race director and I'm like, well, you know, we can't let you race. And I try, like, can I just start the next day and do it the next day? And I'll just give you my data. Like, no, we can't do it, like anything. And so I had to defer again till 2023. So this is now 5 years in the making.
Oof. Wow. All right. Reset again. Now we're into 2023, and you're in the Lead Challenge, and COVID is starting to get in the rearview mirror for some people, not all. I think I got it in 2023, actually. So tell us about 2023 then. What's the idea, and what's the big build-up to the Trail 100, which the mountain bike at least, which is this race?
The season kicks off really great. I started early 2023 with Houston Marathon, had a PR there. Did the Mid-South gravel double. It's a 50K trail run, followed the next day by a 100-mile gravel bike. Did a whole bunch of other races, Bryce Canyon 50, all these other, the Dan Yeti 50, some other really great races. I PR'd again for marathon in Boston Marathon. And then I get ready. It's now in my block getting ready for Leadville Marathon in 2023. Easter Sunday, I'm down. We did her Easter dinner and everything else. Kids are playing, doing something. I don't think they're in the basement or something. And I hear my wife scream down from upstairs like, that's concerning. So I run upstairs. She's in the shower. And she says, Jeff, feel right here. And I felt on below her left breast and felt a lump. Like that's new. She goes, yeah, she does breast exams every time she's in the shower. So, I mean, literally this thing popped up in the last day or two. And well, let's not jump to conclusions, but we need to go to the doctor. So unfortunately, within a couple of days, we got a diagnosis of breast cancer. And, immediately I'm thinking of her and the kids and how we're going to get through this. But you understand that for 5 years, I've been dreaming of Leadville and have had just incredible adversities getting there. And then now this, like, God, somebody does not want me in Leadville. And so, we start attacking it. Like, I didn't mention my race season, with Mary because I knew that she would feel responsible. And so we just went to battle cancer. She had a double mastectomy and we were going to be going into chemo and radiation, all this stuff. But the elephant in the room was Leadville. And one day I think she just snapped. She goes, Jeff, what are you going to do? I'm like, about what? Me playing stupid. I knew what she meant. She goes, what are you going to do about Leadville? I'm like, well, the race isn't going anywhere. I'm just going to defer. And she's like, hell you are. I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, you're going to do that race. I'm like, well, how? Like, there's no way. Like, you're going through cancer treatments. I'm going to have to take care of you and the kids and the dog and my work and all these other things. There's no way I could train or be away from you guys in Leadville for the entire summer almost. And she's like, you know what? We'll make it happen. The thing is, we have no family here in Utah. Like, we're here alone. And we have neighbors that have really been awesome to help out. And it really, I owe it to my neighbors for me being able to even attempt showing up in Leadville. So, towing the line to the Leadville Marathon in 2023, just getting there was a win. Like, I'm here. We've done it. Like, we've pushed beyond these battles and we continue to fight and we're here. So I'm super proud of that. The marathon in 2023, of course, was a freaking blizzard. So we weren't done with the adversity yet. So we just keep fighting.
But you did finish that race.
I did.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
We're pretty clearly getting to the point where we're going to be talking about the Leadville 100 mountain bike race. But just to be clear, you made it through the marathon and you made it through the Silver Rush race. Did you do the run or did you do the ride or did you do both?
I did the ride because I guess I could have done both, but I think the ride was enough for me because I needed to learn what it's like to ride at that altitude. Because especially that year, there's no way I could go up and do any training rides in Leadville with my family at home.
That's right.
So I had to be smart about it. So I chose to do the ride. My God, that was hard. The Silver Rush 50 is no joke.
Yeah. So what kind of position you were? What was your goal going into the lead challenge? I mean, you probably wanted to win it based on your ambitions. You're a fit guy. You take on all things. You've been through hell and back. Your wife's at home going through a lot. I would think at this point, you're like, I'm going to win this thing, or it's win or not, or right, not show up at all. I'm feeling so. Where are you in the standings as you get through Silver Rush, and how are things going back at home? Let's do a quick check-in with Mary as well.
Yeah, Hadi. So, that's interesting you say that. It's my wife that says you better win this. Me, I'm like, I just want to survive this damn thing. So my goal was to finish an hour ahead of cutoffs. But going back to home, Mary, she had the double mastectomy, which was pretty dang tough. She never had a surgery in her entire life. And now, she had an amputation. She never had she had never had any kind of adversity like this, life-altering adversity like I had. And so there was always this kind of like this curtain between us, and that like, well, you don't really understand. You're worrying about things that don't matter in the in the range of things that matter in the world, in your life and world. And there were some things that we just couldn't relate on. Like, let it go. Let's move on, on things. But after going through that, and after this huge adversity in front of my wife, I think she finally starts to understand, like, wow, Jeff, like, this sucks. It's really hard, and certainly we're both stronger because of it. I'm just absolutely heartbroken that my wife has to go through something like I went through, because I know what I went through. And so at this time, she's getting ready to start her first chemo treatment as we're entering the Leadville 100. She'll have 4 infusions over a period of 12 weeks. And so it wasn't until after Leadville that her hair fell out and we continued treatments. But so she at least started chemo, and I made sure that, I wasn't going to leave to go to Leadville until I knew she was stabilized. We flew in her dad and his partner to kind of be with her and my girls while I was away during the 2 weeks at Leadville in August.
Mm-hmm. And we didn't get to the youngsters. You have 2 girls?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got Emma and Lucy. Emma is 6 and Lucy is 4. And my gosh, they are the love of my life. And that little Lucy is a fireball. Oh my gosh. She's a tough cookie. She requires a lot of attention from Mary and I, and it's all hands on deck. She has ADHD pretty severely. And so it's not something that we can just hire a babysitter for. And so that's another adversity that we're dealing with at this moment.
Wow. You're tearing us up, Jeff. Jesus. I got no problems. That's all I know. After this, I have no problems at all in my life.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you can't, like, if something presents itself, you don't just sit back and let it go. You just have to fight it. You just have to fight through. And you'll see going into Leadville 100 the kind of fight that I put up.
Obviously, still more story to be told here. We've saved Jeff's race day story for another episode, so watch for that in your feed. It'll be coming out in a week.
Absolutely. If you like this episode or any of our shows, go to wherever you listen, give us a 5-star rating, and write a review to see all the ways you can find this independent show. It is Leadville.fm.
Good luck in your training. Thank you so much for listening. We're going to see you so soon at the starting line.